Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. We'll give people a few seconds to join and then get started. But while we're waiting, we'd love it if you would introduce yourselves and your organizations in the chat so we know who's in the room. And also to answer a poll that will launch shortly about what sector you are from. So thanks for taking care of that. And we look forward to speaking shortly. Okay, I'm going to get started. Uh, Welcome to this special edition of our Next Generation Now author conversation series. We're delighted that you're with us today to discuss themes from our book, Next Generation Evidence, and to explore the dramatic changes that are occurring in this space, AI-enabled decision-making for impact. I'm Tamar Bauer. I'm a co-editor of the book with one of today's panelists, Kelly Fitzsimmons, and a senior advisor at Project Evident. Our organization's mission is to harness the power of data, evidence, and technology for greater impact. We believe that evidence is power, and we work to build power where it matters most. Project Evident was launched in 2017 out of a sense of constructive dissatisfaction with a one study at a time approach, where funders and researchers drove research agendas on their own instead of collaborating with practitioners. We've partnered with over 300 nonprofits, funders, researchers, and school districts to modernize, humanize, and scale how evidence is built and used. If you'd like to follow along with our work, Megan is sharing a link in the chat to sign up for that. As some of you may know, this passion project traces its roots back to 2019 when we held a convening at the Brookings Institution, co-sponsored by the William T. Grant and Arnold Foundations. Around 100 stakeholders, including powerful representation on purpose from practitioners, gathered to discuss shared challenges and opportunities. As a result, we developed 5 principles of next generation evidence, and we wrote a book featuring short essays from over 80 authors that was published by Brookings in 2024. The 5 principles, we're having a little trouble here. We'll figure that out. The 5 principles that will be on the screen form the framework for the NextGen book and continue to guide our work today to strengthen the evidence ecosystem. The 5 principles are that a NextGen evidence ecosystem centers practitioners, those doing the work to deliver services, we call them practitioners, and the communities they serve, and it empowers them to drive their own evidence agendas. It connects equity with data and evidence, both in the way that evidence and data are built and used, and in the types of outcomes we seek to address. It elevates community voice and empowers members to shape and participate in the evidence-building process so that results are of value. It embraces an R&D-like approach to enable timely and relevant continuous evidence building. And finally, it broadens the definition and use of evidence to be responsive to the operational context of practitioners and doers, attend to systemic and structural conditions, and prioritize decision-making and learning. Today, I couldn't be more pleased to have 2 of our inspiring authors and Project Evident team members with us whose work exemplifies these principles. I'm so honored to be joined by Kelly Fitzsimmons, the CEO and founder of Project Evident, who will now introduce our other panelist and newest member of the team. Kelly?
Thanks, Tamar, and hello, everyone, and thank you again for joining us. It gives me tremendous pleasure to introduce my brand new team colleague, Pete York, Chief Data Scientist at Project Evident, who also has joined us from BCT Partners, longstanding, deeply respected colleague in the field, partner in crime, and under the tremendous leadership of Randall Pickett. So just completely delighted to be able to do this with Pete today and with you, Tamar.
Thank you, Kelly. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. And we are so happy to have you with us, with the team, Pete. Heads up to everybody who has joined. We'd love to hear from you during this conversation. If you didn't get a chance to fill out that poll or introduce yourself and your organization in the chat, we'd love you to do so. And we also like to make these interactive, so feel free to share any questions you have along during the time. Oh, we can see what sectors you're from. Thank you. Um, okay, as sort of expected. Um, so feel free to put your questions in the Q&A function at any point. We have reserved time to answer questions, and that should be a good part of the conversation. Kelly, Pete, thank you so much for your leadership, for your contributions to the book and the evidence ecosystem, and most importantly, for joining us today. I'd like to invite each of you to share a few words about what brought you to this work. How did you come to this work? Kelly, let's start with you.
Sure, and thanks, Tamar, and thank you for all you do and all that you have done over decades of service in the social sector. I have served in the nonprofit education sector for over 30 years as a practitioner in anti-poverty and education nonprofit organizations, struggling to make better use of data and evaluation and funding to drive impact under difficult conditions. I've served as a funder and at a venture philanthropy fund, one of the first of its kind, and also at a high engagement evidence-based funder that was driven to invest larger amounts of growth capital in those programs with greater scale and, more importantly, greater evidence. I've served as a coach to leaders who were trying to advance their impact journeys and started Project Evident about 8 years ago, fundamentally to elevate the role of practitioners in impact work in general, to move them from the caboose of the evidence train, if you will, to the engine. And that concept of constructive dissatisfaction has motivated me throughout, and it motivates me and excites me for this conversation today. It infuses our work. We care deeply about evidence. We care deeply about impact. We care deeply about equitable outcomes, and are tremendously excited that we're able in this moment with the advent of generative AI to go deep at the intersection of data, evidence, and technology together. In some ways, AI has been a Trojan horse for good because it has brought more attention and excitement and curiosity to foundational issues of data infrastructure, of evaluation practice. But I think together we can reimagine a whole new generation of evidence now fueled with this technology that we were just at the very beginning at when we brought the book out.
Amazing. Oh, thank you, Pete. And what brought you?
So my background, the story I'm often telling is that I started out as a social worker. So the early part of my career, I spent 9 years on the front lines. I worked inpatient psychiatry with kids in residential settings, and I spent a couple years as a caseworker for the homeless in Indianapolis, Indiana. Then I went on, I was always somebody interested in data and research, and I went on to graduate school and then started my evaluation work, which I've been an evaluator for over 25 years. I cut my teeth, believe it or not, as the first ever project manager of a theory of change evaluation back in 1990, dating myself here, 94, 93, with an Aspen Institute funded first ever, like, hey, what's this? Nothing as practical as good theory. And I was just in the right place at the right time at Case Western Reserve at the Mandel School, working with Claudia Colton and Sharon Milligan, and got to be able to cut my teeth on evaluation. Got the bug because I saw how applied evaluation was as using research data to try to inform policy, practice, programs, funding, etc. So I spent the next 25 plus years as an evaluator in this space, mostly consulting in both nonprofit and for-profit companies and working with private philanthropy, corporations, nonprofit organizations, all evaluating social impact. What happened was, as that proceeded for a long time, I came to the realization pretty quickly that the reports that we were producing as a part of evaluation, the findings and everything that was being done, was helpful for policy, helpful at a macro level for funding decisions, but wouldn't have helped me on the front lines. You have general guidance it can provide, but everything's in averages, everything's rolled up, and answers are at a big level. And about a dozen years ago, started exploring this idea that if Netflix can figure out what movies I'd like, and if Amazon can figure out what products would be best for me, how does this tools of data science and machine learning and AI could help on the front lines to bring these evaluation findings to the front lines? So then I spent the next 12 years up until now really exploring with a lot of folks and collaborating with others to try to help to refine the tools of machine learning and AI and how to use it, because the tools themselves have a lot of biases in them and a lot of problems with them, and how to use those to advance the use of AI and machine learning for evaluation purposes. How do we train these algorithms to do good research, good evaluation? Um, and then over the past few years, have seen how we can now take that to a whole nother level of automation, and it's totally transforming stuff. Now, in those past 12 years, I've been a long fan, well, for at least the past 10, right, Kelly, in terms of Project Evident and all the work that's going on here. And we were always resonating, working. I've known Kelly for a long time and some of the folks here at Project Evident, and just we've been so in sync on the what we're doing. So I'm happy to now be here, joining the team and really helping to shepherd this post ChatGPT generation of AI and how we can really start to inform evidence generation.
Fantastic. Thank you. Now let's jump into the meat of the conversation. Kelly, you've
Yes.
written that while practitioners and their funders have long been committed to driving impact for communities, recent developments and next generation evidence practice now offer these leaders a new, faster, and better way to make the decisions that matter. What
Yeah.
are those developments?
Yeah. So we are going to get into more depth and specifics, but I'd like to walk us back and grounding to a little bit of what I shared in the book, which really starts from the matter of perspective and the fact that where we stand determines what we see. And reminding ourselves and grounding ourselves, I think, in the fact that for too long in the social and education sector, impact evaluators, TA providers, researchers have really stood outside programs and organizations, studying the elements of their practice and its relationship to results. Instead of really engaging inside or alongside listening to practitioners and those they serve, students, community members, frontline staff, and so on, to understand their definitions of success. So if we hold that frame a little bit again, where we stand determines what we see. I think we are at an advent or a moment with this technology, with related tools, and with some of the shifts that we can more easily be invited inside the production of outcomes at an organizational level and alongside in collaboration with practitioners. So a lot of these tools and technologies are tremendous enablement that are counter to a lot of incumbent practices that we've been trained to, rewarded for, so on and so forth. And what's incredibly exciting, I think, with this shift, with evaluation that is enabled by AI and related technology, is that now it's even more possible to move to better, cheaper, faster impact. And when we talk about better, I think what we mean, well, I know what I think we mean. We mean being more strategic about what data to collect and why, and how to use it so that we're getting at true leading indicators of the most equitable outcomes that are most meaningful. We're able to be cheaper, not be cheap, but cheaper, to use tools and technology to lower the cost of collecting, generating, and using evidence, because the costs have truly been prohibitive to date. So this is an exciting new frontier to be in. And then finally, faster. Testing early and often to support continuous improvement of programs, products, and services to take more of an R&D mindset is critically important, because the decision-making cadence that most practitioners operate in is on a mode or in a rhythm that traditionally just doesn't align with other, particular dominant methods in research. What all of this means I think on the upside is this creates new, better opportunities for researchers, evaluators, and TA providers to engage. These tools offer that. But it also, I think, calls us all to a moment of reflection to question, when have we, as TA providers, researchers, and so on, actually, and funders, when have we been in the way? What do we have to change about our own perspective and our own practice so that we're better able to engage with practitioners using these tools and come to terms with that, which will also involve some change management and letting go of old habits and old business models.
Thank you. That's terrific. Pete, before going deeper into the approaches that Kelly mentioned, I think it would be useful to level set, to start with a high-level summary or framework of where we are with using AI to generate and use evidence in the nonprofit sector. Thank you, Megan.
Great. Thank you. So along these lines, I want to kind of open up what's happened in a very rapid amount of time. As I noted, been working for the past dozen years in trying to bring ML and AI in partnership. And by the way, I do also want to give a big call out to BCT Partners, where I have worked with folks there, and we've partnered together on a lot of this, and partnered with Project Evident on many projects. And so look forward to all of that, and where a lot of this rich learning and capabilities have really begun to bring to light. So what I'd like to share with you all is the idea that I'm going to give you an analogy. In the space right now, we know that the world of software engineering is being transformed by AI. So these are technicians. We can now build full stack, applications and software without knowing how to code. Okay. For those of you who may not know that, have not explored that, that's a very fascinating space, because what is happening right now is AI is giving us the capabilities of being able to quicker, faster, cheaper, be able to build things and build tools and applications and everything. And take that software example and ask the question, how could you then analogously apply that to the space of evidence generation? And I think we're in a time and place post Gen AI, post ChatGPT, where we really have a transformative capability and a lot of already advanced work, and a lot of the stuff that Project Evident has been doing, a lot of stuff that we've been doing in the past as well in partnership, is really beginning to think about how these tools can really, and how these resources can really transform how we generate evidence. When it comes to what you're seeing on this slide, and I'm somebody that likes to provide the slide, and by the way, we're going to create a link for everybody to be able to have this. I won't speak to everything here, but I want to highlight a few pieces here. We are now in a time and place where, in partnership with AI, and I'm going to emphasize something throughout, which the critical role of humans in the loop, with humans being able to validate, review, and do all of this work. But there's so much of the technical work, just like the software engineering technical work. A lot of the software engineers now are being able to shift their work towards being able to help better design and interact with humans to use software. And the actual technical part is where a lot of the AI is coming in. That's the case here. When we look at how we plan our evidence generation, there are so many tools out there that are now helping us. And these are tools, by the way, that we've got some experience with. I've done a lot of work with places like the National Science Foundation, the World Bank, and others, and we're developing tools for qualitative, quantitative analysis, conducting deep research, bringing program expertise, training, and building knowledge bases that is context for AI to be an amazing resource to us all. There may be a feeling like it's taking some of our technical job labor work away, but I actually think the opportunity is what it's going to do from a new kind of development, get us all shifting our focus to being able to do what a lot of folks in the evaluation and evidence generation space are really interested in doing, which is how do you help make meaning and translate and empower and use data and information, which has been really locked up in a lot of the technical methodological constraints. That's the opportunity with respect to AI for evidence generation. We're now in a place where, if you look at that bottom part of the slide, there's so many things that we can now partner. Remember, we'll still review and validate and do all of that, but a lot of the labor of what we can do can now be done by agents and applications and AI LLMs to be able to help us do all of these things that are a part of this evidence generation process. that opens up what Kelly was speaking to, which is the opportunity to really learn, continuously improve through the use and generation of evidence in ways that reaches practitioners, everybody in a quicker, cheaper, better way. And by the way, in a more timely, relevant to now, and adaptable way. It orients us in a very different way. And so there's a lot of excitement here. At the heart of this, I'm going to talk in a moment, but I'll pass it back to you. We'll talk about a specific element of what's going to be a centerpiece of this evidence generation, because there are some challenges with AI. And we're going to talk about some of the challenges and everything else. But I'm going to talk about one thing I'm going to say right now, and then I'll talk more about it in a moment. All of this has to be put together in a way with the principles that Kelly just ran through that evolve, that form the next generation for evidence principles. And a big part of this too, along those lines, is to be able to really help everybody use these tools in a way that we're not uh, it, bringing inequities, perpetuating biases that are all in our data. As humans, we make decisions, we record those decisions, we're biased in our decision making, and that all shows up in the data. And we really have to pay attention to how to do that, and I'll talk about that next. But that's our opportunity here, I think, for our future in terms of AI for evidence generation. And in the past few years, it has transformed in a way that we never had before. And just like software, we could almost, instead of software engineers, think about the evaluation engineers and how we can start to democratize this work in ways in the same way, because the tech and the AI is there.
Pete, you've written that there's no debate about the impact we want, but we have long debated how to get there and what counts. With approaches including precision causal modeling, AI, and equitable data practice, we can achieve more than ever before. So let's dig in further to understand more about these approaches and how they can expedite and improve decision-making for practitioners. That's the exciting thing.
Yeah. So one of the things, and I'm not going to read this slide. This slide is for your own information, but sometimes infographics say, a slide can say 1,000 words. But I want to come back to something that I was speaking to before, which is the idea that, first of all, a few ideas that we all know when we do this work, and historically, evaluation, utilizing evaluation, evidence generation. We've all known for a long time that one size doesn't fit all, right? Think precision medicine. We know that there are opportunities to figure out what works. The challenge I had years ago in looking at machine learning and data science, and forgive me for all the data scientists on this call, but I didn't find a lot of science in data science. There was a whole lot of predictive analytics, which were getting comfortable with correlational associational modeling. And I think one of the principles we have to really ground this work in, if we're going to generate evidence, we have to mean something with that term evidence, and it has to bring in a principle of causality, right? We have to at least aspire to be able to use just like the software engineers have a way of coding, we have a methodologies, experimental design, quasi-experimental. If we're leveraging data, this is where, to me, I saw years ago a big problem. You can't just apply predictive analytics. It's not good enough to say we can predict something. We need to explain why. And the why is causal. It's not correlational. So that brings in, how do we do this work? There has to be almost a heart of evidence generation if we're going to use AI, because of all the potential for biases and other issues. We have to be able to do that. And what you're seeing here is a causal modeling process that is basically a hybrid methodology of like training AI to be more of the skeptical science, bringing in good research methodology, being the quasi-experimental designer, again, with humans in the loop. I'll talk about that later. What you see here is a process that we can now know and do that's no different than years and years of research studies that have just found natural experiments in existing data sets. In healthcare, nobody could study whether smoking caused cancer with a randomized control trial, right? It was observational studies, but specific methods. What you see here, and I'm not going to go detail on it, but the key thing is here is a stepwise process that we can now train machine learning algorithms and AI in a way to be able to take data, find your contextual twins in that data. This is an example from a residential psychiatric care. I saw Gemma Services. Kate Ryan, I gave you a little shout out there in terms of some of the work that we've done and as a case study in the project evident case studies. Um, we find people like you, organizations like you, communities like you. So we're not, that's the precision. Discover, we can train algorithms to figure out what works. We can figure out whether there's a difference and actually train algorithms and statistical tests to figure out if something's statistically significant. And most importantly, when we're finding people like you, let's not match on things that really shouldn't be selection criteria. If your race should not be a reason that you get a program or don't get a program, we don't match on that. But what we do is evaluate for your group, your contextual twin group, we should see no difference on gender or race and who gets what works. In this way, believe it or not, that second step you see here, that matching controls for selection bias, and the assessment at the end controls for some of the social biases. Minimize, it doesn't remove everything. These are some principles. And I just want to high level say this. If we don't bring causality to to AI and machine learning, we are really risking a lot with respect to biases and problems with respect to what's being said. It's not just hallucinations, it's hallucinated cause and effect, because we as humans, one of our biggest cognitive biases, whether we like it or not, is anything that's in our minds are correlated, we perceive it to be causal. Okay. So we have to do it. So this is just a way of beginning to introduce everybody to the idea that there's a centerpiece approach to how we do AI for evidence generation that has to weave in causality. So bringing that more to the fore.
Pete, there's a question that just came in and I'm gonna put it forward, that this sounds quite a bit like propensity score matching. How is it different?
Yes, propensity score matching it is like, and I encourage you to read Gary King, who's I think he's an economist out of Harvard, who has written actually an article that kind of stirred the world a little bit, how propensity score matching brings some problems with respect to actual observational research studies, which what they're describing is PSM is used in a lot of research studies where you take existing data, find natural experiments by matching through propensity score matching. It is analogously similar, but we're trying to minimize actually some of the challenges with PSM. So I will say this, it actually mirrors kind of is analogous to that methodology, but we're actually leveraging machine learning to do it in a way that mitigates some of the problems with it. And I want to emphasize something else. Machine learning is also different than traditional statistical modeling because we can use qualitative categorical data, quantitative data. It can ingest all different types of independent variables and different inputs. There's a whole lot more that can be done with ML. It's very different than statistics. I teach a whole class on this, but at the end of the day, just know we are talking a different approach to things. But yes, it's similar to, but mitigates some of the problems with PSM.
I think, well, there's some other questions coming in, but I think we're going to hold them till a little bit later. But thank you. Keep sending them in. That's great, and we'll get to them after we've gone through the meat of the content here. And there is a question about, well, let's just keep moving. Okay, Kelly, let's take this back. How do these approaches that Pete is talking about, how do they tie in with next generation evidence practice as described in those principles?
Sure. We won't harken back to the principles that we shared at the beginning, but I will go through each of these, but just invoke some of our core elements here of the practitioner centricity, and really centering on the needs of practitioners and the communities that they serve, embracing a more R&D, continuous learning type approach, and reimagining evidence to broaden its definition and its use. So what are those sources of things that come into the equation that help us better understand, know, and then fundamentally make decisions? So with a nod to Fast Company, thought we would use their contrast frame. They're from, if anyone is familiar with that magazine, and they're like, the old and the bold, to share a little bit of what we really imagine these applications, these approaches give rise to, and really bring next generation evidence to life. And so I think first and foremost, this notion of where is the expertise located? In the old frame, really, the expertise was really situated with the evaluator or the technical assistance provider. Like they were the expert providing their knowledge to the recipient program or organization that was being studied or being helped. What's interesting and what shifts when we think about the next generation and what does this look like tomorrow, in some ways is the democratization of expertise. But what we can think about now is expertise is spread across multiple fora, including evaluators, of course, including practitioners, because we have been increasingly counting what practitioners think, what they know as evidence. I've certainly been part of funding evaluations and seen evaluations discounting some of the sort of practitioner surfaced data or practitioner surfaced evidence. Agents and apps are also now purveyors of expertise. And so we've got a broader array rather than sort of one central location or one central source. We've got a broader array of this type, the expertise that we need that sort of goes into the range of evidence building and use activities that Pete was walking us through. Cost has been an enormous factor, and that leads to cost exclusivity. And in turn, what that also has meant is then who gets to participate? And so it really has been those organizations who are the better funded, who are the largest, or maybe they have the fortune of being in more elite or more supported grantee portfolios or part have been selected into particular funding opportunities. And that's a good and fine thing. Again, it's just not a democratized access. And so if we think about ways that we can flatten the cost curve with these tools, we can break open that cost exclusivity and trade it, quite frankly, for cost inclusivity. So this is now more available to all who want it, recognizing not everybody wants it, but we really think a particular type of leader serious about driving impact wants to engage in this work more readily. They just want some of the barriers removed. And I think we all have an obligation to remove these barriers, including cost. Finally, timeliness. A lot of the older models or the incumbent models, it would take months to years to get information back that's meaningful. When we launched Project Evident and we put the shoe leather in and visited with hundreds of practitioners and data scientists and evaluators, the theme and funders, the theme that we heard over and over again was that it took so long for me to get results back from my evaluation. And to Pete's point, like causality is really important and we should be striving for that as much as possible. So, RCTs, QEDs, like important evaluative work, that doesn't change. It's just, can we change the timeliness of it so that we can get more information better and faster so that it is actually used. So again, one of the things that we heard in the past is it took so long for information to come back. Programs were changed in the interim because they had no choice, because students needed something else or something, something evolved, and they weren't really able to use information that was coming back from a lot of the studies because the window of opportunity for implementation had passed for a number of other externalities, reasons. What's exciting about a lot of the methodologies that we've been talking about here is that it really changes that time frame to give more information faster. So we can think that, this is a little extreme, but we can think about evidence on demand, but thinking about going now from like weeks to real time, from having to, wait months and sometimes years. I was in discussion with a leading practitioner 2 days ago who has been part of the third largest anti-poverty study, that's been released in the United States. She started the randomization. She was part of the randomization to launch that study when she was pregnant. Her child is now in first grade and they still don't have the report back. And so we're still having these models that we've got to think about rationalizing timelines for how we get information, how we're building evidence so that we can drive the decisions that need to be made on the timeline that's ultimately going to bring better, more equitable outcomes for those that need it. Finally, the practitioner, not finally, but next to finally, the practitioner centricity, which very much underscores our work at Project Evident, very much underscores the NextGen evidence principles, is really in the older model. It was not centering practitioners and who they served, both and from a methodological perspective, because we were aiming more towards, averages than maybe paying attention to what's happening for particular demographics or like subgroup analysis, that sometimes it wasn't really answering the questions that practitioners really had about their own work. It might have been answering the research questions, but left aside what was more important locally. And I think what we're seeing with more of these methods is the opportunity to be much more case specific, more tailored, more contextually relevant for the worlds in which practitioners are operating, in which students, program participants, community members need the results of that information so they can do a set of things with it in a way that makes sense for them. Not in a way that maybe makes sense for somebody else's context, but a way that makes sense for me. And then finally, as someone who engaged in some of this behavior as a funder, I think we have overused at times evidence to create the thumbs up, thumbs down. Did it work or did it not? When often we're trying to solve larger social problems, and we need to focus on the learning in order to do the problem solving. So trading that thumbs up, thumbs down for more of an R&D, continuous learning, adaptation, continuous improvement, so we can get closer and closer and better at solving some of the larger, gnarlier, challenges that affect the lives of those who may not have the resources to do anything about their situation without the supports or services they're getting through programs. So in this way, we're seeing these possibilities from this technology applied to evaluative practice as enlivening the principles from NextGen evidence.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to turn now to something you've both touched on, which is the risks associated with these approaches, especially as it relates to tools and people. We're in a fundamentally different place today than when this book was written, which was before the development of generative AI. Given where we are today, what are your high-level thoughts on the guardrails needed to prevent misuse of each of these approaches, and which sectors suffer the consequences if there are no guardrails? If you can get to it. We don't have a whole lot of time, but Kelly, you want to jump in?
Sure. I'll offer a couple of thoughts and then turn over to Pete so that we keep on time. But I would say at the highest level, one of the biggest risks, and I'm going to invoke one of our wonderful authors, our dearly departed Lola Adedokan, whose chapter was entitled Leadership is Cause, All Else is Effect. And there is a risk that if leaders do not take on board the necessity of understanding what this technology is, what it can do, what needs to be managed, what governance is required to ensure that it is safely, effectively, and productively used in your context, to me, we'll get into more specifics like within the technology and within that sort of data practice, but there's an enormous leadership risk if we don't see those that have the ability to make decisions at the highest level in organizations, if those, the guidance and guardrails and governance models aren't set up. And so that really is at the leadership perspective. Here, I'll make a plug for, resources like EdSafe AI framework, and that community has done a tremendous job setting up guardrails and frameworks for thinking about safe and effective and useful practice in the education space. But I think really encouraging leaders to seek out these opportunities for education, for the governance models. Don't just do a cut and paste of somebody else's model, but really putting, the muscle and the time into figuring out what is best for your context. Pete?
Yeah, so that's great. I will provide a little bit more of the specifics, and there's specific issues I have, and we should all be very concerned about with respect to this AI world. One critically important one is identity, security, and confidentiality. The whole notion, we have to protect people's personal information. It's HIPAA required, FERPA. Like when you look at everything that's required, this is a big, big issue in terms of being able to leverage existing data, use existing data, gather data. We really need to be considering what that looks like. Um, Biases are another big risk, whether it's social biases that are recorded in data sets, whether it's selection biases that we talk about in terms of who gets selected for programs or for studies, research, and algorithmic biases. As I noted earlier, correlation is not causation. It is a big risk that we will draw conclusions that sound causal. Just because a trend line goes up doesn't mean progress for everyone. Doesn't necessarily mean what we're looking for. It could be a correlation, okay? Non-transparent algorithms. When we do this work, we have to be able to see inside. So what are the guardrails? We are now in the guardrails. The number one guardrail is humans in the loop. I mean, this is the key. We need to create a way for reviewing, validating, and overseeing every step in what we do. We do need to educate ourselves as to what guardrails are needed. For example, if you are using ChatGPT to analyze qualitative data, you are risking the identity of those data, whoever provided the answers you're putting in there. Okay. So, what does that mean? We have to create secure environments, right? You should be doing your analysis in a secure environment, like a cloud environment. Whether it's AWS, Azure, all the different kind of ways you can create secure environments for doing this work. With respect to de-identification, a lot of our work doesn't actually require identification, the identities. So you can de-identify data and still get a whole lot of evidence generation from the data. We just group things in groups and cluster data in a way. There's all kinds of techniques to de-identify. Where we can't de-identify, we're doing a big project with a big central bank in a country that you can do synthetic data creation. The synthetic data could be a way to begin to build models and understand things in different ways. Synthetic data is coming a long way. What does synthetic data mean? It basically means creating cases of data that look exactly like or similar to the cases in the data, but they're obviously synthetic, so they're not actually somebody's personally identifiable information. So we have to create these environments. Causal modeling, bringing causality to the training of ML and AI is a fundamentally important piece if we're ever going to address biases and make strategically good decisions, funding decisions, practice decisions, policy decisions. Avoiding black box algorithms where we can, and being able to train AI how to explain what's going on inside of their algorithmic process. Transparency. Part of the scientific method that we don't talk about often is peer review. We have to bring humans into this process, and we have to see. We should be thinking peer review of algorithms. And if we can't see, there are tools and technologies now that allow us to see what's going on inside an algorithm. What are the variables? How are they playing with each other? How are they interacting? These are all things that are there, but each one requires some deliberation, some forethought, and a lot of humans in the loop, reviewing, validating, overseeing. Now, that may seem like it's slowing down the point we're making about speed and cost and everything else. But the truth of the matter is, we're still not talking months and years, but sometimes we need a little friction when we're using AI because actually things need to slow down a little bit. Otherwise, we're going to be on the risk side of this diagram here that we're talking about.
Mm. So we're already there, but I'm going to ask you to synthesize into just a few sentences. What are you most optimistic about And what are you most worried about? So 2 minutes each. I know that's a lot, but just throw it out there just for conversation. Kelly, do you
Go ahead.
want to jump? Whoever's
Or
ready. Go
I,
ahead.
I, I am most optimistic about more of these tools in the hands of practitioners who care the most, who are the ones holding themselves accountable for driving these outcomes, for signing up for this work in the first place, in a context and in a time when it's arguably harder to serve, and the power that these tools can provide to ease the decision-making burden, sometimes ease the talent challenges, but energize and refresh the work. Being able to be part of R&D, insights generation, understand better how the thing you care about works is exhilarating. And I believe in that work. It will be part of the more that we're doing this work, it will be part of creating more stickiness and attraction for more talent to come into the space at the front lines and as practitioners, which we badly need.
Reserve your caution for later. Pete, what are you most optimistic about? And
I'm most optimistic about the opportunity to actually put evidence generation into everyone's hands. I think the democratization of evidence generation with these tools is it's there. The field has come a long way. I will even tell you it's so moved so fast in the last 3 weeks. I've seen a whole nother leapfrog. I mean, there's the tools are here. The on the flip side, the concerns are related to this in the sense that the speed with which things are happening and the capabilities that are now available, that we are going to start applying this without some thoughtfulness. And specifically, I'm coming back to the I am worried we're going to use AI correlationally, not causally, and it is going to perpetuate biases as a result. I think that right now we have large language models entered the space where they were just predicting the next word. Now we've got actually a whole nother layer that a lot of people don't realize is logical reasoning and thinking. You see it thinking now. They're actually advancing the models are now reasoning and thinking. Okay. So, and anybody says it's just predicting the next word, it's advanced to a whole nother level. There's reasoning and thinking, and they're all pushing for AGI, general intelligence. Okay. Now, I believe the third wave that I wish we could start to transform is not just logical reasoning, but causal reasoning, right? So we get to the truth and we all know it's probabilistic, but at least a better estimation of truth and causality is something that has to be a cornerstone. And I'm really, really worried that if we're going to address bias, we're going to ignore one of the biggest tools that we all know from a scientific standpoint is the tools of causal analysis and then how to present that information to the general lay public, which the tools are there to do.
there are a lot of questions coming in. Before we take questions from participants, in just a few words, guys, can you identify one actionable step related to all of this that you're passionate about, but that is often overlooked by funders, by researchers, by practitioners, by whoever in the field? Something, one thing. Pete, you're on.
Learn more about causality. There's a great book called The Book of Why by an actual data scientist at UC Berkeley who won the Turing Prize, Judea Pearl. I recommend reading The Book of Why to get a little bit more. It's a little technical in places, but there's a good high-level overview of the history of how we use statistics and data to determine this problem. Is it correlated or causal? So learning a little bit about that. That would be my one thing, only because obviously I'm championing this idea that it's got to be a centerpiece if we're going to move forward with effective generation of evidence using AI.
I'm ordering it today. Kelly?
I would just offer some walk around questions, which are, what does good look like? How do I implement it in the approach to work from wherever you're sitting, a practitioner, evaluator, technical assistance provider, and don't lose sight of the implementation.
Okay. Now we're going to move to everybody in the room. Thank you for your time and interest. Thank you for all your questions. I'm hoping we can go somewhat quickly through them because there are a lot. In the meantime, Megan is sharing the screen. If you want to learn more, please click on this link. And now I'm going to start with this question, and either of you answer it. A lack of training on how to use these developing tools seems like an unmentioned risk in this conversation. How do we develop the sophistication required to use these tools well? Thank you for that question.
Um, do you want to answer first, Kelly, or I can jump in either way?
I think you should take this one, Pete.
Yeah, so this is actually such a critically important, super valid question. I think the opportunity really is that I think if we're going to get to this, and at Project Evident, what we're really talking about is how you scale, because this is moving from just technically using these tools. I believe the future is going to be just like in software engineering. We need to start to build the AI supporters of the technical steps. And what we do is we have to basically train what I would call kind of an intermediary, the evaluators, the technical assistance providers, the capacity builders on how to use those tools so that you become kind of the analog of the no code user of like a Bolt or a Lovable, but we're using AI tools that help do some of the technical piece with human oversight and somebody who at least understands the rules of how to set up an experiment and what you're supposed to do. So I do think that there's a very important opportunity. We have to teach everybody how to fish, so to speak. And I don't think it's going to be one-off training people to do specific technical steps. I actually think we need to lean into the AI and specifically agentic tools with humans in the loop. And what we do is we train people to become the no-coder users of bolts and lovable analogs in our space, which for all of you that don't know what I'm referencing, we can now build apps without being an engineer. But those apps have to follow certain rules. The best ones that use those apps are people that have been trained broadly on how to do that, but they don't have to necessarily learn how to detail code and slog it out on bug zapping. Those are the kind of things that I think is really, in practical terms, what's going to be needed. But we are now in a space where those tools and technologies are available. We have to do the work. And I think at Project Evident is the exciting space I think we're trying to explore a little bit more is how do we really build that capacity to leverage these tools that can do a lot of the technical lifting, but in a responsible, debiasing, way. And I think that's the future. And I think that the tools and technologies are here for that.
Um, a question about under which conditions is democratized evaluation most effective? Conversely, are there conditions where it becomes counterproductive or constrains innovation?
Um, did you have a thought on that, Kelly? I can't tell whether.
I I can't I can't think of strong examples where it constrains innovation. I think we have more evaluation. I think we have more examples of where we've missed the innovation
Yeah.
opportunity because we didn't
Democratize. Yeah.
democratize in the first place. And I think, we were talking about think of us, for example, earlier, Pete. Like I think in those in a different conversation, I think in those moments where we have used technology to again like just decrease the cost to be able to collect more information and perspective in a more open, democratized way, and then open that up for sense making has resulted in stronger offerings, better services, more information for advocacy purposes.
I agree. I, I think that, I don't see I would love to be able to explore what some of the downsides might be to democratization of these tools. I think it's hard to know that because I don't think we've nearly ever gotten there. And
Yeah.
so to me, there's going to be way ups. I see the upsides because
Yeah.
I've already begun to see how people just are able to access. Look, as a practitioner, when I was a practitioner on the front lines, I didn't think of data. I wanted information and how I could use it to help this person in their life right now. And believe me, if that information wasn't helpful to me and I had a mechanism to learn and share just what could happen, and now we can collect that information and that feedback and feed it all back. I think the opportunity for evolving and adapting learning, a way of learning and generating and learning from evaluation is just right here. And any kind of constraints there might be, let's not put it in constraints, let's put it in consequences. There will be consequences because there's a lot of stuff that we're all doing in the evaluation space that doesn't have to be done by us. So it's going to shift. I see a kind of a workforce shift where what we're going to be developing is the people, that human in the loop. I think there's a whole lot of work there. And if there's any constraint, it's going to be resourcing the humans that have to be in the loop for that next layer of work, which is actually the making meaning and the planning and pulling everything together, the culture change that would probably have to ensue from this. These are the things that to me would be the biggest constraints, would be the resources to actually make democratization come to life. And I think at the end, I think that's where we've got to begin to shift. And imagine if we can shift some of the resources that have gone into the description you gave, Kelly, of the example. Their first graders still, they don't have their RCT findings. There's probably a lot of dollars associated with all that effort too. If we start shifting that to building the capacity for making meaning, interpreting, translating, changing, those things, I wonder where we would be. But it's going to take resources. It's going to take effort and investment.
Pete, are there fresh examples of learning networks, continued success with scaling youth roadmap tool and other outcome metric collaborations to find block matched groups? Yeah, I'm just trying to get in a few more questions here.
That's a interesting question. I probably need a little bit more back and
Okay.
forth to kind of get into, but I think the idea of learning in groups is a cost-effective way to begin to do this. And I do think that there are ways through cohorts of capacity builders, cohorts of organizations that can begin to. That's the other thing, is if everybody does their own idiosyncratic work, there has to be some sharing. And I do think, broadly speaking, I think that's a very specific question. I'd be happy to follow up subsequently to answer.
I think we're going to try to answer some of these questions by email when we follow up with you because we simply can't get to everything. But I'm going to do one more here. Could you discuss how these tools might be used for work that is not direct service provision? For example, initiatives aimed at systems improvement, more effective policy, or game-changing innovation.
Think of data at different levels. So we're talking about direct service, but there are a lot of practitioners working at a community level where, we have a lot of experience taking data that's American Community Survey data or IRS 990 data at the organizational level. There are data sets for which you can also do this kind of work and should be generating the kind of evidence that informs over time what investments in communities and organizations are really moving the needle. So there are your unit of analysis is not just individuals as direct service recipients. It can also be policy. It can be community, place-based. That's a matter of the data set that you're working with and the capabilities and the questions you're asking. So it can change with that.
Kelly, anything on that? Anything else you
Um,
want to
I
add?
was, no, I do appreciate the question sort of broadening beyond direct services, which I know is we've been overly focused on here, but we're just getting exposed to more and more examples. And the truth of the matter is we have to get more use cases of what this looks like out. So this is mainstream rather than this isn't fringe evidence behavior. This
Yeah,
is the
yeah.
new mainstream. And so there's like some really interesting use cases we're kind of coming across of organizations that are mapping waterways in rural communities, which are actually impeding the ability to equitably get to jobs, to trade, to other services. And these things are unmapped in the dominant, like Google Maps, or in the dominant geospatial assets that are available. With that mapping, then there's a whole decision-making framework that has to come around those data sets to then help communities, government, others make decisions about where to invest the capital to build bridges, to build the infrastructure, to so those waterways don't impede or contribute to poverty levels in some of these communities. And so I think the applications here from an ecosystem perspective, which combines direct service, systems change, like advocacy, are really, really powerful.
And on that note, we are at time. Thank you all for attending. My deepest gratitude to Kelly and to Pete. This was fascinating, and also to the incredible audience who had an endless number of questions. I love the last one. What about a 1-month cohort for NPOs? Absolutely. We're looking at many things. Today's event is part of an ongoing series of Next Generation Now conversations that will continue in February of 2026, including a special 4-part series with Pete that highlights practitioner use cases, dives into the critical question of causality, and introduces Project Evidence vision for a nonprofit data hub. I hope to see you then. Until soon, look forward to seeing you again. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.